I thought it was relevant today because it's the first kind of peek behind the curtain that we've gotten with a mock draft for the upcoming spring. You've got now a reasonable expectation of around where the Saints will be drafting. I would suggest if I gave you an opportunity to get within 4 picks of where the Saints are drafting, you could probably do it. If you picked the 5 spot in the draft, you would probably be close enough to where the Saints are going to pick. You try to do that on September 28th, you're really playing with some hypotheticals there. Now, as we're just about in the middle of December, you got a reasonable expectation of where the Saints are going to be picking. And Field Yates put a mock draft together with the current standing in the NFL, and the Saints are the 5th pick in that mock draft. So you start to look at the players that are toward the top of the draft, and you can actually start kind of identifying potential players the Saints could look at, because I would submit that at this point, in the middle of December, we've got a decent idea of the guys in the top 10, 12, 15 picks in the draft. You start getting back towards 18, 22, 25, like it starts to get a little bit less certain. There are still combines to go through, still a lot of evaluation that's got to be done. Guys have got to declare for the draft or potentially come back, and there are a lot of moving pieces, but you kind of know who the top 10 or 12 guys are that are moving into this draft, and the Saints are going to be right there in the middle of that. So I wanted to see what Field Yates was going to do, more so from a who's around at that pick and what you think the Saints may lean toward as far as position goes. So I go to this mock draft, and he's got the Saints picking 5th. First pick of the draft, as we all think is probably going to happen, Fernando Mendoza, who's going to win the Heisman Trophy on Saturday. First pick, he's got that to the Jets via a trade with the Giants. Second pick, he's got Dante Moore, the quarterback out of Oregon, going to the Raiders. Third pick, Tennessee Titans taking Arvell Reese. This is a guy that a lot of Saints fans are going to covet. He's an edge player from Ohio State. I understand why. I would love it if the Saints took Arvell Reese, but they've got him going 3rd in this draft to a 2-11 Tennessee team currently. And then they go right back to Ohio State with the 4th pick for Carnell Tate, a wide receiver who is also going to get a lot of buzz for the New Orleans Saints in this draft. So that leaves the Saints there at 5. And the pick for Field Yates is Francis Mauigoa, offensive tackle from Miami. Now, the point of this segment is not for me to break down Francis Mauigoa, because I'm not going to do that on December the 10th. That's not my beat. We're too far down the road for me to break down his tape and say whether or not that's a good pick for the Saints based on what I think he can or can't do. Not the point of the segment. The point of the segment is, where do we think the Saints would go? And obviously this raises some eyebrows, because as Field Yates writes, he says that taking an offensive tackle in the first round for the 3rd straight season might seem odd, but the Saints could move Taliesin Fuaga from right tackle to right guard in this scenario. Okay, here's the point of this segment. I don't want the Saints to take an offensive lineman in the first round of this draft. I don't. Not because offensive line is not important. Not because the Saints are overvaluing offensive line. It's really important to get an offensive line together. It's really important to help a young quarterback out with a really good offensive line. And the Saints' offensive line right now is not good. So taking an offensive lineman does make sense. Also, to Field Yates' point, it is easier to find a cornerback or a running back or a safety or a linebacker in the 5th or 6th round than it is a starting offensive lineman. Why? Because there are more people who are 6'1", 220 that can run than there are 6'6", 312 that can move. That's just simple. So it does make sense from that perspective. But here's what I think about the Saints and what they need to do with an early pick in this draft. You got to go somewhere else and help your roster, because while you're sitting here taking an offensive lineman with your top selection in 4 of the last 7 drafts and your last 2, it would be 3 in a row. It would be 5 out of 8 and 3 in a row. You would have been taking an offensive tackle, offensive lineman. You're allowing the rest of your roster to deteriorate. You're not getting any help for Pete Werner or Demario Davis at the top of the draft. You're doing that maybe with Danny Stutzman later on. Like, I realize you're not going to take an inside linebacker with the 3rd pick in the draft, but like, you're not helping those guys early in the draft. You're not getting impact running back. Your running back's 30 years old, and you're hoping that Devin Neal from the back end of the draft is going to help you with that. Your wide receiver core, since you took Chris Olave, has been a mercenary unit. You got a diamond in the rough, Rashid Shaheed. It came time for contract time. You traded him. Now you're clinging to, a guy that was a 7th-round pick that you traded a 4th-round pick for, and then Mason Tipton, who you got off the scrap heap. You're allowing all of these position groups to deteriorate and not get you're looking for Pro Bowl level impact with the 5th pick in the draft, with the 9th pick in the draft. And you're spending all of that on one spot. And oh, by the way, it's not very good. So you've got to help out other parts of your roster instead of just continuing to sink resources into one aspect of your roster and letting everything around it crumble. You haven't drafted a quarterback at the top of the draft. So you spent $100 million on a guy that couldn't play and got hurt, and now you're hoping a 2nd-round pick hits. And I'm not here to tell you that Tyler Shuck's not going to hit and Devin Neal's not going to hit and Mason Tipton or Devon Bailey can't be good players. I'm not here to tell you Danny Stutzman can't make a Pro Bowl at inside linebacker. Like, that's not the point, but big picture. You got to help other places on the roster, not just offensive line. And in this scenario, you're telling Taliesin Fuaga, hey, we drafted you, you played left tackle, thanks. Then we moved you to right tackle, learn that, thanks. Now we're moving you to right guard, learn that. Well, now you're about to be at the end of his rookie deal and you can't find a spot for him. So, like, if they took Francis, because it's not pronounced like it says, so I have to look, Maui Noah. It looks like Maui Goa, but it's Maui Noah. If they took Francis Maui Noah with the 5th pick, I wouldn't suggest the franchise was doomed. I wouldn't suggest you're taking a terrible player. I wouldn't suggest you're taking a guy that can't help you. I would suggest you're letting another year go by at the top of the draft where you're not helping your wide receiver core and you're not helping your running back situation. You haven't taken a corner in the 1st round. You traded up and you went and got Kool-Aid McKinstry fairly early in the draft, but are you as good at corner as you were with Marshawn Lattimore out there? No, you're not. And you're not going to get Pro Bowl level players in the 1st round. You're going to get guys who aren't working out. Trevor Penning didn't work out. You're shuffling Taliesin Fuaga all over the place. I think he's a good player, but you got to help. I think it's a wide receiver. I think it's a wide receiver at that spot. And in this mock draft, yes, right in front of you, Carnell Tate comes off the board of the Browns, but then right behind you at pick number 7, Jordan Tyson from Arizona State comes off the board to the Giants. And that's a guy at Arizona State who has missed a little bit of time this year with a hamstring injury, but has been really, really productive. He's had over 1,800 yards over the last 2 seasons playing with Sam Leavitt out there at Arizona State. Like, that's a guy that can help. That's a guy you can bring in to help your young quarterback. That's a guy you can bring in with his size, his playmaking ability to bump Chris Olave down to a number 2. And then you got Devon Bailey as a number 3. And now all of a sudden it looks a little bit more like if you hit on that pick and he looks like Jamar Chase or he looks like Malik Neighbors or the guys that we know around here that you plugged into these offenses. I mean, look what Emeka Ibuka's doing in your division out of the 1st round. Like, get a guy in there to be a difference maker. Put Olave right behind him where he becomes a below average 1. Now you're talking about a solid 2. Vele, what he's done the last 3 games, that's a real 3 with a big body. And all of a sudden, now your wide receiver core is revitalized again. Instead of just continuing to pump assets into an offensive line that's not playing very well. So, yeah, I understand it on its face. I don't think Field Yates has made a foolish selection here. I just disagree with the direction that the franchise would go in that pick. So, again, the next 4 weeks are very interesting from a how they play perspective. They're very interesting for a do they win perspective to see where they actually end up picking in this draft. And ultimately, it's not the wins and losses this year that matter as much. It's the roster reconstruction that goes on as you continue to push forward under a new head coach with a new quarterback and with a roster that's going to shed a lot of old, expensive players in the next 14 months. And then what's right there behind them? You got to have good young players. You're going to be picking towards the top of this draft. You've got to make that pick count. I'm not telling you what kind of player I think you're talking about in Francis Maui Noah. I'm talking about the position that he plays and the direction of your franchise. I would go with an edge rusher. I would go with a wide receiver, I would go with someone at a position where you haven't addressed that well enough early in drafts in the very recent past. Hey, it's Hunt. Thanks for watching Hunt on Saints. Before you leave, help us out a little bit. Hit that like button, leave your comments in the section below, and hit that subscribe button so you get all our content right here from Hunt on Saints. We'll see you next time.